A millionaire found his ex-wife kneeling on the floor of his hotel. She was the new cleaning lady, and what's more, she was pregnant. He was paralyzed to find her again after so many years, but now he was married to another woman. A twist comes when the man who got her pregnant shows up. A powerful, abusive man with a thirst for revenge. See the outcome of this surprising story by watching to the end. An infertile millionaire decides to visit an orphanage in search of an heir, and a little boy shouts, "I've been waiting for you for 7 years, Daddy." He is completely shocked to recognize that boy's eyes. Who do you think it was? Leave it in the comments and watch until the end to see the outcome of this beautiful story that will fill your heart with love. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. Alexander Montenegro's polished leather shoes clicked against the marble floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel, each step echoing through the vast lobby like a metronome counting the seconds of his carefully structured life. The morning sun streamed through the towering glass windows, casting prismatic patterns across the space he'd built, from nothing but ambition and determination. At 42, he'd achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of, or so he thought. The hotel stood as a testament to his success, 35 floors of luxury, each detail meticulously chosen to reflect the excellence he demanded in every aspect of his life. From the hand-carved mahogany reception desk to the crystal chandeliers that seemed to float overhead, everything spoke of wealth, power, and uncompromising standards. Running his fingers through his salt and pepper hair, Alexander adjusted his tie, a habit he'd developed during the countless board meetings that filled his calendar. Today was different, though. The quarterly performance review of the housekeeping department wasn't something he usually attended, but with the upcoming expansion plans, he needed to ensure every aspect of his operation was running smoothly. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Probably another message from Victoria, his wife of 8 months. She'd been sending him ultrasound pictures all morning, their unborn son growing steadily within her. The thought brought a smile to his face, even as it added another layer of pressure to his already heavy shoulders. Soon, he would be a father, and the legacy he'd built would have an heir. The service corridors were a stark contrast to the opulent public areas, functional, clean, but devoid of the luxury that characterized the rest of the hotel. As he made his way through the warren of behind-the-scenes passages, a sound caught his attention. At first he thought it was the hum of cleaning equipment, but as he rounded the corner, the distinct sound of muffled sobs stopped him in his tracks. The sight before him made his world tilt on its axis. There, kneeling on the floor with a cleaning rag in her trembling hands, was a ghost from his past. Elena. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, so different from the elaborate styles she'd worn when they were married. Her uniform was several sizes too large, but it couldn't hide what his trained eye immediately noticed, the gentle swell of her abdomen. 5 years. It had been 5 years since their divorce, since she'd walked away from their marriage claiming she needed to find herself. 5 years since he'd thrown himself into building this empire, turning their failed relationship into fuel for his ambition. And now here she was, pregnant and cleaning floors in his hotel. Elena hadn't noticed him yet, too absorbed in her task and her tears. Her shoulders shook with each suppressed sob, and Alexander found himself rooted to the spot, unable to move forward or retreat. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the confident art gallery owner he'd married, the passionate soul who'd once challenged him to dream bigger than he'd ever dared. Questions exploded in his mind like fireworks, each one demanding immediate attention. How long had she been working here? Who had hired her? Why was she in this position? And most pressingly, whose child was she carrying? Before he could decide how to proceed, his phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't an ultrasound picture from Victoria. Instead, it was a message that would set in motion a chain of events he couldn't have predicted. "Mr. Montenegro, urgent matter regarding Richard Maxwell's acquisition proposal. He's demanding an immediate meeting." Richard Maxwell. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. The man was known for his aggressive, business tactics, and his ability to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Alexander had been carefully avoiding Maxwell's attempts to buy into the hotel chain for months, but something about seeing that name now, while Eleanor knelt crying on his floor, made his instincts scream in warning. He took a step forward, the sound of his shoe against the tile finally alerting Elena to his presence. She looked up, and their eyes met for the first time in 5 years. The recognition, shock, and something else, was it fear, that flashed across her face, made his heart constrict. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could imagine. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, the cleaning rag falling from her hands into the bucket of soapy water with a soft splash. Her eyes, still glistening with tears, darted toward the nearest exit. But she remained frozen in place, caught in the magnetic pull of Alexander's gaze. The silence between them crackled with 5 years' worth of unspoken words. "Mr. Montenegro," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The formality of her address hit him like a physical blow. This woman had once whispered his name in the dark, had once shared his dreams and his bed, and now she stood before him like a stranger. "Elena," he responded, his own voice rougher than he intended. "I think we need to talk." She shook her head, one hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. "There's nothing to talk about, I'm just doing my job." Alexander stepped closer, noting how she tensed at his approach. The Elena he'd known had never shied away from him, had never shown fear. What had happened to transform his vibrant, fearless ex-wife into this shadow of herself? "How long have you been working here?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. 3 weeks, she answered, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over his shoulder. "I didn't know it. I knew it was your hotel, but I didn't think—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "You didn't think I'd be here," he finished for her. "The owner of the hotel checking the service corridors?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "Things have changed, Eleanor. I've changed." His phone vibrated again, insistent and demanding. Without looking, he knew it would be about Maxwell. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. His mind raced through possibilities, each more alarming than the last. "You're married," Eleanor said suddenly, her eyes dropping to his left hand where his wedding ring caught the fluorescent light. "I saw it in the papers. Your wife, she's pregnant too, isn't she?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Yes, Victoria was pregnant. His carefully planned future was unfolding exactly as he'd envisioned. A new wife, a child on the way, his business empire growing stronger by the day. But seeing Elena here, in these circumstances, made that future suddenly feel like a house of cards. "Who's the father, Elena?" The question escaped before he could stop it, his voice carrying an edge of authority he usually reserved for board meetings. The color drained from her face, and for a moment he thought she might faint. Her hand gripped the nearby cleaning cart for support, knuckles white with tension. "Please," she whispered, I can't talk about this. I need this job, Alexander. I need to disappear." The desperation in her voice set off every protective instinct he'd thought he'd buried years ago. Something was very wrong. The Elena he'd known would never beg, would never accept defeat. Before he could press further, the door at the end of the corridor burst open. Marcus, his head of security, rushed toward them with an urgency that immediately put Alexander on alert. "Mr. Montenegro, sir," Marcus said, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Maxwell is in the lobby. He's demanding to see you immediately. He says it's about—" Marcus's eyes flicked to Eleanor, who had gone completely still. "Certain investments he's made in your property." Alexander watched as Eleanor's face crumpled, pure terror replacing the fear that had been there moments before. In that instant, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Richard Maxwell, the ruthless businessman who'd been trying to force his way into Alexander's company, the man known for destroying anything he couldn't possess, was somehow connected to Elena's situation. "Marcus," Alexander said, his voice deadly calm, "escort Mrs. Harrison to my private office. Use the service elevator. Make sure no one sees you." He turned to Elena, who looked ready to bolt. "We're not finished here. Whatever's going on, whatever you're running from, you're not alone anymore. His phone buzzed again, and this time he looked at the screen. The message made his blood run cold. Tell your little cleaning lady that she can't hide forever. Everything has a price, Montenegro, even your precious hotel. Alexander squared his shoulders, every fiber of his being shifting into battle mode. In the lobby, Richard Maxwell waited like a predator sure of his prey, but he had seriously miscalculated. He might be used to dealing with frightened business owners and corrupt officials, but he'd never faced someone with nothing left to lose. Richard Maxwell cut an imposing figure in the Grand Plaza Hotel's lobby, his 6'3" frame wrapped in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and predatory, as he stood surrounded by an entourage of lawyers and assistants. Every head in the lobby turned to watch him, but not out of admiration. There was something about Maxwell that triggered humanity's most primitive warning systems. Alexander emerged from the service area, his mind racing but his exterior calm and collected. He'd built his empire by never showing weakness, and he wouldn't start now. As he approached Maxwell, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. In his private office upstairs, Elena was waiting, carrying a secret that could potentially destroy everything he'd built. Montenegro. Maxwell's voice boomed across the lobby, too loud, too familiar. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. Richard, Alexander responded coolly, extending his hand for a brief, firm shake. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. Maxwell's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Some opportunities can't wait for scheduling. Shall we discuss this somewhere more private? His eyes scanned the lobby meaningfully. I have some rather interesting propositions for you. Alexander led the way to one of the hotel's private conference rooms, his mind working overtime. He needed to keep Maxwell talking, needed to understand exactly what kind of hold he had over Elena. As they settled into the plush leather chairs, Alexander noticed something unsettling. Maxwell kept checking his phone, as if waiting for confirmation of something. I'll be direct, Montenegro, Maxwell began, leaning forward. Your hotel chain is impressive, but it could be so much more. With my resources, my connections, he paused, his smile turning cold. My ability to handle certain problems that might arise. I've been very clear about my position on selling, Alexander replied evenly. The Grand Plaza hotels aren't for sale. Not now, not ever. Maxwell chuckled, the sound devoid of any real humor. Everything's for sale, Alexander. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned it to show Alexander a picture that made his heart stop. It was Elena, clearly taken without her knowledge, entering the hotel's service entrance. The timestamp showed it was from 3 weeks ago, the day she'd started working there. Beautiful woman, Maxwell commented casually. It must have been quite a shock seeing your ex-wife in such reduced circumstances. Tell me, does your current wife know about this little reunion? Alexander's fingers tightened on the armrests of his chair, but his voice remained steady. If you're attempting to blackmail me, Richard, you should know that my marriage to Elena is public record. There's nothing scandalous about encountering a former spouse. Blackmail? No. Maxwell waved his hand dismissively. I'm offering you a chance to protect yourself. You see, Eleanor and I have a special relationship. She's carrying my child, after all. The confirmation hit Alexander like a physical blow, but he didn't let it show on his face. Instead, he watched as Maxwell continued, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. Unfortunately, Elena's been quite unstable lately, making wild accusations, threatening to go to the press with all sorts of fabricated stories. It would be a shame if those stories somehow involved you or your hotel. The media loves a scandal, especially when it involves someone as prominent as yourself. What exactly do you want, Richard? Alexander's voice was ice-cold. Maxwell's smile disappeared, entirely, replaced by something dark and possessive. I want what's mine, all of it. The hotel, the child, the woman, everything. You have 24 hours to accept my offer, or I'll destroy everything you've built. And trust me, I'll start with that pretty new wife of yours. Before Alexander could respond, Maxwell's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted to one of barely contained rage. Without another word, he stood and strode toward the door, pausing only to deliver one final threat. "Check your security feeds, Montenegro. It seems your ex-wife has a habit of disappearing. Let's hope nothing unfortunate happens to her while she's under your protection." As soon as Maxwell left, Alexander was on his feet, running toward his private elevator. His security chief's voice crackled over his earpiece. "Sir, we have a situation. Mrs. Harrison. She's gone. But you need to see this. She left something. In your office. Something that changes everything." Alexander burst into his office, immediately spotting the envelope on his desk. His name was written across it in Elena's familiar flowing script, the letters slightly shaky but still elegant. Before he could reach for it, Victoria's voice froze him in place. "I came to surprise you with lunch," his wife said softly from the corner of the room. She stood by the window, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly, the other holding her phone. "Imagine my surprise when I found a strange woman in here instead." Alexander's mind raced. How much had Victoria seen? What had Elena said to her? The situation was becoming more complicated by the second. "Victoria, I can explain." "She already did," Victoria interrupted, her voice surprisingly calm. "She told me everything, Alex. About her pregnancy, about Maxwell, about the threats. She also told me something else, something I think you need to see before you make any decisions." Victoria walked to the desk and picked up the envelope, handling it with unexpected care. "I read it," she admitted. "And Alex, you need to sit down for this." Inside the envelope, Alexander found several documents. The first was a letter, tear-stained but legible. "Alexander, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't stay here. My presence puts you and everyone around you in danger. But you deserve to know the truth about Richard Maxwell, about what he's really doing, and why I ran. The pregnancy isn't recent. I'm 7 months along, not 5 as I've been pretending. The timing matters because it proves what the enclosed documents show. Maxwell has been using his construction companies to launder money through real estate projects across the country. The Grand Plaza hotels are his next target. I discovered this while working as his personal assistant. When he found out I knew, he didn't threaten me. He courted me, manipulated me, made me believe he loved me. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already pregnant and trapped in his web of lies and control. But I kept gathering evidence. It's all here. The fake contracts, the shell companies, the bribes, everything you need to stop him. I'm trusting you with this because I know who you are, Alex. You're not just a businessman, you're a man of principle. You always have been. Take care of yourself and your family. Victoria is a remarkable woman. She listened to my story without judgment and showed me more kindness in 10 minutes than I've experienced in months. You chose well this time. Elena. The remaining documents were a devastating trail of evidence. Financial records, emails, photographs of Maxwell with known criminals. Everything needed to bring down his empire. But the last piece of paper made Alexander's blood run cold. A medical report showing that Elena had been hospitalized 3 months ago after a fall that had nearly cost her the baby. "She's running." "From him again," Victoria said quietly, moving to stand beside her husband. "But this time she's given us the weapons to fight back." Alexander looked at his wife with newfound appreciation. Where he'd expected jealousy or anger, he found strength and determination. "Us." Victoria's hand tightened on his arm. "That woman is carrying a child, Alex. She's terrified, alone, and trying to protect her baby from a monster. Whatever happened between you two in the past doesn't matter now. What matters is stopping Maxwell before he can hurt anyone else." Alexander's phone buzzed again. Another message from Maxwell. "Your time is running out. Soon everything you love will be mine." But as Alexander looked at the evidence in his hands and felt his wife's steady presence beside him, he realized something important. Maxwell had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that Alexander's weakness was his past with Elena, but his real strength lay in the present, in the family he was building, in the principles he lived by, and in the unexpected allies he'd found. "We need to move fast," Alexander said, already reaching for his phone. "I have some calls to make. Victoria, I need you to do something for me. Something that might seem strange." Victoria raised an eyebrow, her hand still protectively cradling her belly. "What do you need?" "I need you to check into the hotel's presidential suite, publicly, very publicly. I want Maxwell to think I'm hiding you away, protecting you. Meanwhile, I think I know where Elena might have gone, somewhere Maxwell would never think to look." A small smile curved Victoria's lips. "The old art gallery, the one where you two first met." Alexander stared at his wife in surprise. She shrugged. "Elena told me the story. Said it was the one place she felt safe, even after everything fell apart. Go find her, Alex. I'll handle things here." As Alexander hurried out of the office, he heard Victoria on the phone, her voice carrying the perfect mix of excitement and entitlement. "Yes, I'd like to book the presidential suite. This is Mrs. Montenegro. And please send up some champagne, the non-alcoholic kind. My husband and I have something to celebrate." The game was on, and this time, Maxwell wasn't the only one who knew how to play. The old Burlington Art Gallery stood like a forgotten memory in the heart of the city's arts district. Its once pristine facade was now weathered, the elegant signage faded, but Alexander could still see its former glory, could still remember the first time he'd walked through those doors and found Elena passionately arguing with a client about the merits of contemporary abstract art. The street was quiet as he parked his car, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. The gallery had been closed for years, its windows covered with old newspapers, a "for lease" sign perpetually hanging in the front window. But Alexander knew better, knew that Elena had maintained ownership of the building even after their divorce, even though she'd never reopened the gallery. He approached the side entrance, the one they'd always used after hours, and found it exactly as he remembered. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the loose brick beside the door, their old hiding place for the spare key. It was still there, untouched after all these years. The door creaked open, releasing the musty scent of neglected spaces. Motion sensors detected his presence, and old track lighting flickered to life, illuminating empty walls that had once showcased some of the city's most promising artists. His footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as he made his way through the main gallery space. "Elena," he called out softly, not wanting to startle her if she was indeed here. "It's Alexander. You're safe." A sound from the back office caught his attention, the slight scrape of a chair against the floor. He moved toward it, remembering. Countless late nights spent in that office, planning exhibitions, discussing artists, dreaming about their future together. He found her sitting at her old desk, looking both out of place and perfectly at home in her hotel uniform. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a determination in her posture that reminded him of the woman he'd first fallen in love with. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked, not looking up from the papers spread across the desk, copies of the same documents she'd left in his office. "Because I remember," he said simply, staying in the doorway to give her space. "I remember everything about you, Elena, including how you always came here when you needed to think." She finally looked up at him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I thought I was being clever, hiding in plain sight. The one place Richard would never think to look because it's too obvious." "You were always the clever one," Alexander said, taking a cautious step into the office. "The one who could see the bigger picture while I was focused on the details." "The details matter now more than ever," Elena replied, gesturing to the papers. "These aren't just financial records, Alexander. They're proof of everything, the money laundering, the bribes, the connections to people who—" She swallowed hard. "People who make problems disappear." Alexander moved closer, scanning the documents. His years of business experience let him see the patterns immediately. The complex web of shell companies, the impossibly perfect timing of certain acquisitions, the way money moved through Maxwell's organizations like water through a sieve. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since he first saw her in the hotel. Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly. "Because I didn't know who to trust. Richard. He has people everywhere. Police, government, business, and when I found out I was pregnant, she took a shaky breath. He changed, became possessive, controlling. Said the baby gave him leverage, insurance that I'd never betray him. But you did, Alexander said softly. You gathered all this evidence. I had to, she whispered. The night I overheard him discussing the hotel deal, your hotel, I knew I couldn't stay silent. He doesn't just want to buy the Grand Plaza hotels, Alexander. He wants to use them to expand his operation. Your legitimate business would be the perfect cover for his illegal activities. A noise from the gallery's main space made them both freeze. Elena's eyes widened in fear, but Alexander held up a reassuring hand. The sound of high heels on hardwood approached, and Victoria appeared in the doorway looking somewhat out of breath. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. But we have a problem. Maxwell just called an emergency board meeting at the hotel. He's claiming to have evidence that you've been embezzling funds, Alexander. He's trying to force a vote to remove you as CEO. Elena stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. No, that's what he did to his last target, the Rivera Hotels in Miami. He forces out the legitimate owners with false accusations, then swoops in as the savior with a buyout offer that the board can't refuse. Then we need to stop him, Victoria said firmly, crossing the room to stand beside Elena. Both of you know parts of who Maxwell really is. Together we might know enough to bring him down. But we have to move now. Alexander looked between the two women, his past and his present, both carrying new life, both showing a strength that humbled him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Maxwell had tried to use Elena to destroy him, but instead he might have provided the very means of his own destruction. The board meeting is in 2 hours, Victoria continued. Just enough time to get ready if we hurry. Elena gathered the documents with trembling hands. He'll have security watching every entrance to the hotel. How can we even get in? A slow smile spread across Alexander's face as an idea formed. Through the front door, he said. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight, isn't that right, Elena? The Grand Plaza Hotel's lobby was bustling with its usual evening activity when Victoria Montenegro made her grand entrance. She commanded attention in a designer maternity dress, her head held high as she strode purposefully toward the executive elevator. Behind her, 2 women in expensive business attire followed closely, their faces partially obscured by large sunglasses despite the indoor setting. Maxwell's security team watched Victoria's progress with obvious interest, but none moved to stop her. After all, they had been explicitly told to monitor the wife of their target. What they didn't realize was that beneath the elegant clothing and careful makeup, Elena walked with practiced confidence, while beside her, Alexander's most trusted attorney, Sarah Chen, carried a briefcase containing everything they needed to destroy Richard Maxwell's empire. They had transformed Elena in the back room of the art gallery, using Victoria's spare clothes and the skills she'd learned from years of preparing artists for gallery openings. The slight swell of her pregnancy was disguised by the clever cut of the jacket, her distinctive dark hair hidden beneath a sophisticated blonde wig that Victoria had convinced her personal stylist to deliver on short notice. As the executive elevator doors closed behind them, Elena finally let out the breath she'd been holding. I can't believe that worked, she whispered, removing her sunglasses with shaking hands. People see what they expect to see, Victoria replied, squeezing Elena's hand reassuringly. Right now, Maxwell's people are looking for a frightened housekeeper, not a confident businesswoman. Sarah Chen checked her watch. The board members are already gathering in the main conference room. Maxwell's legal team arrived 15 minutes ago. They looked far too pleased with themselves. They won't be smiling for long, Victoria said, her voice hard. During their rushed preparations at the gallery, she had reviewed the evidence Elena had gathered, her background in corporate law allowing her to quickly understand the implications of each document. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor where Alexander was waiting for them. He had arrived separately, maintaining his normal routine to avoid arousing suspicion. His eyes widened slightly at Elena's transformation, but he quickly focused on the task at hand. Maxwell's inside with the board, he reported in a low voice. He's already started painting the picture of financial misconduct. We need to time this perfectly. Sarah nodded, opening her briefcase to distribute copies of key documents. I've highlighted the most damaging evidence, the money trail through the shell companies in the Cayman Islands is particularly compelling. Wait, Elena said suddenly, gripping Alexander's arm. There's something else you need to know before we go in there. Something I discovered just before I ran. She glanced nervously at the others before continuing. The reason Maxwell's been so aggressive about acquiring the hotel isn't just about money laundering. He's after something specific, something hidden in the original building plans from when your father first built this place. Alexander frowned. What are you talking about? The hotel was built from the ground up after my father bought this land. Elena shook her head. No, it wasn't. The original foundation belongs to an old bank building from the 1920s. Maxwell has been searching for something that was supposedly sealed in the old vault before it was converted. He never told me what it was, but whatever it is, he's desperate to get his hands on it. Victoria's eyes lit up with understanding. That's why he specifically wanted the basement levels included in any sale agreement. We all thought he was just being thorough, but he's been planning this all along. A commotion from inside the conference room interrupted their discussion. Through the frosted glass walls, they could see Maxwell's imposing figure gesturing dramatically, his voice muffled but clearly, agitated. He's making his move, Sarah whispered. We need to go in now. Alexander straightened his tie and looked at each woman in turn. Remember the plan. Victoria, you and Sarah present the financial evidence. Eleanor, wait for my signal. Before you make your entrance. Maxwell's greatest weakness is his pride. When he sees you here in control and unafraid, he'll react. And when he does... We'll be ready, Victoria finished, her hand finding Eleanor's and squeezing it once more. As they moved toward the conference room doors, Eleanor caught Alexander's arm one last time. Whatever happens in there, she said softly, thank you for believing in me, for helping me protect my child. Alexander looked at his ex-wife, then at his current wife, seeing strength and determination in both their faces. No, he replied, thank you for trusting me enough to help bring this man down. The conference room doors opened, and Maxwell's voice boomed out. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Alexander Montenegro has been systematically destroying the value of your investments. The only reasonable course of action is to... He stopped mid-sentence as Victoria swept into the room, Sarah Chen beside her, their expressions confident and unwavering. Alexander followed, taking his place at the head of the table with calm authority. I believe, he said clearly, that the board would be very interested in seeing some additional financial records before making any decisions today. Maxwell's face darkened as Victoria began distributing documents, but he had no idea that his worst nightmare was waiting just outside the door, ready to reveal the true extent of his crimes. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The boardroom crackled with tension as Victoria distributed the documents. Maxwell's confident smile had faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with practiced nonchalance. His eyes, however, betrayed his unease as they darted between the papers being passed around and Alexander's composed expression. What exactly are you trying to prove here, Montenegro? Maxwell's voice carried its usual authority, but there was an edge to it now. These amateur accusations won't distract from the real issue at hand, your mismanagement of this company. Before Alexander could respond, Victoria stepped forward, her pregnancy adding a maternal authority to her presence that commanded attention. These documents, she began, her lawyer's training evident in her precise tone, show a pattern of suspicious financial transactions through various shell companies connected to Maxwell Enterprises. The board members, all experienced business, people who had initially seemed ready to side with Maxwell, began studying the papers with increasing interest. Alexander watched as their expressions shifted from skepticism to concern. This is absurd, Maxwell scoffed, but his hand trembled, slightly as he reached for his water glass. You expect the board to believe these obviously fabricated documents over years of proven misconduct by your husband. Sarah Chen stepped forward, her heels clicking decisively on the polished floor. These records have been verified by 3 independent forensic accountants. The transactions detailed here show systematic money laundering through real estate acquisitions across 5 states. Maxwell's face reddened. "You dare to make these accusations? Do you have any idea who I am? What I'm capable of?" His mask of civility was slipping, revealing glimpses of the man Elena had fled from. "We know exactly who you are, Richard," Alexander said calmly, pressing a button on his phone. It was the signal they'd arranged, and right on cue the conference room doors opened. Elena walked in, head held high, the blonde wig and expensive clothing making her almost unrecognizable from the frightened housekeeper of that morning. The effect on Maxwell was immediate and dramatic. He half rose from his chair, his face draining of color. "You," he sputtered, his composure completely shattered. "How dare you show your face here, after everything I've done for you?" Elena's voice was steady as she addressed the board. "My name is Elena Harrison. Until 3 months ago, I was Richard Maxwell's personal assistant, and I can testify that every document in front of you is authentic, because I'm the one who compiled them." Maxwell slammed his fist on the table, making several board members jump. "You signed non-disclosure agreements. Everything you're doing right now is illegal." "NDAs don't cover criminal activity, Mr. Maxwell," Sarah Chen interjected smoothly. "And we have evidence of quite a lot of that." One of the board members, an elderly woman who had been quietly studying the documents, looked up sharply. "These transactions through the Cayman Islands, they match the pattern from the Rivera Hotel's takeover, the one that led to multiple federal investigations." Maxwell's face contorted with rage. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, where his phone was buzzing insistently. Alexander tensed, remembering Elena's warnings about Maxwell's connections to dangerous people. But Victoria was already 1 step ahead. She pressed a button on the conference room's control panel, and suddenly the large screens around the room came to life. Security camera footage began playing. Dozens of clips showing Maxwell in clandestine meetings with known criminals, accepting briefcases in dark parking garages, having heated arguments with people whose faces had appeared on Most Wanted. "Lists. How did you—" Maxwell's voice trailed off as he recognized the footage. These were his own security recordings, the ones he'd kept as insurance against his criminal associates, the ones that had been stored in what he thought was an impenetrable private server. "You're not the only one with skilled computer experts, Richard," Alexander said quietly. "The difference is, mine work legally for my cybersecurity department." The boardroom had gone completely silent, except for the damning footage playing on the screens. Maxwell's eyes darted toward the door, but 2 of Alexander's security team had appeared there, standing ready. "You don't understand what you're doing," Maxwell hissed, his voice desperate now. "The people I work with, they won't let this stand. They'll come after all of you." Elena stepped closer to the table, one hand protectively over her pregnant belly. "They already know, Richard. Every piece of evidence we're presenting here was sent to the FBI an hour ago. Your associates are probably too busy saving themselves to worry about saving you." As if to confirm her words, Maxwell's phone buzzed again. When he looked at it this time, his face went completely white. Without warning, he lunged across the table toward Elena, his eyes wild with rage. "You ruined everything." But Alexander was faster. He intercepted Maxwell's attack, pushing Elena safely behind him, while Victoria pulled her further away. The security team rushed forward, restraining Maxwell as he continued to shout threats and accusations. The board members watched in shocked silence as the man who had nearly taken control of their company was led away in handcuffs. But the worst revelation was yet to come, because Elena still held one final secret, one that would explain why Maxwell had been so desperate to gain control of the Grand Plaza Hotel's basement vault. In the aftermath of Maxwell's arrest, the Grand Plaza Hotel's executive floor buzzed with activity. FBI agents moved efficiently through the space, collecting evidence and taking statements. The board members had convened in a smaller conference room, processing the dramatic events they had witnessed while drafting an emergency resolution to affirm their support of Alexander's leadership. But in Alexander's private office, a different drama was unfolding. Eleanor sat on the leather sofa, her disguise removed, looking exhausted but relieved. Victoria perched beside her, their shoulders touching in a show of solidarity that would have seemed impossible just hours ago. Alexander stood by the window, watching the FBI vehicles assembling in the parking lot below. "There's something else you need to know," Elena said softly, breaking the contemplative silence. "Something I discovered in Maxwell's private files the night before I ran away." Victoria leaned forward, her legal mind already working. "Something about the old bank vault?" Elena nodded, pulling a folded paper from her jacket pocket. It was old, yellow with age, and carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. "This is a letter from 1928, written by the bank's original owner. I found it hidden in Maxwell's personal safe." Alexander moved from the window to join them, taking the delicate document carefully. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "This can't be real," he whispered. "It is," Elena assured him. "I had it authenticated before I left. That's why Maxwell was so desperate to get control of the hotel. The vault doesn't just contain old safety deposit boxes. It contains evidence of what really happened during the banking crisis of 1929. Victoria's eyes widened as she read over Alexander's shoulder. "These names. These are the founding families of half the major corporations in the country." Elena nodded grimly. "The letter details how certain powerful families orchestrated the crash, profiting from it while thousands lost everything. Maxwell found out about it through one of his less savory connections. He thought he could use the evidence to blackmail some of the most powerful people in the country." Alexander sank into a nearby chair, his mind racing. "My father, he must have known. That's why he insisted on keeping the original vault intact when he converted the building. He was protecting the evidence." "And now we're protecting it too," Victoria said firmly. "This kind of historical evidence needs to be handled carefully. Those families are still powerful, but they shouldn't be allowed to bury the truth anymore." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered, looking pleased despite her obvious exhaustion. "The FBI wants to speak with all of you, but I've negotiated a delay until tomorrow morning, and—" She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "The board has just unanimously voted to reject Maxwell's takeover attempt and reinforce their confidence in your leadership, Alexander." Elena stood up, swaying slightly. Victoria immediately reached out to steady her, and for a moment the two women looked at each other with perfect understanding. They had both loved the same man, but in this moment they had forged something unexpected, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared courage. "What happens now?" Elena asked, looking between Alexander and Victoria. "Maxwell's associates will figure out that the vault is what he was really after. They might not stop just because he's been arrested." Alexander walked to his desk and pressed a button beneath its surface. A hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a state-of-the-art safe. "First, we secure the letter. Then we make sure its contents are protected but accessible to the right authorities. The truth deserves to come out, but in a way that serves justice, not vengeance." Victoria nodded approvingly. "I know some historians and investigative journalists who can be trusted to handle this responsibly. People who care about accuracy and context, not just sensationalism." "And what about—" Elena's hand moved to her belly, her voice faltering for the first time since the confrontation with Maxwell. "You'll stay in the hotel's secure wing until the investigation is complete," Alexander said firmly. "Both of you," he added, looking at Victoria, who smiled gratefully. As if in response to the tension finally breaking, both babies chose that moment to kick. Eleanor and Victoria gasped in surprise, then laughed, the sound bright and healing in the aftermath of so much stress. Sarah, watching from the doorway, shook her head in amazement. "I don't think this is quite what Maxwell had in mind when he tried to use your past against you, Alexander." "No," Alexander agreed, looking at the two strong women who had helped save everything he held dear. "He never understood that real power doesn't come from threats or manipulation. It comes from truth, trust, and the courage to stand up for what's right." Outside the office windows, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in dramatic shades of orange and purple. In the fading light, the Grand Plaza Hotel stood tall and proud, its secrets finally starting to emerge from the shadows. But unlike the secrets Maxwell had planned to use for destruction, these truths would serve a different purpose. They would help ensure that history's lessons would not be forgotten and that justice, though long delayed, would finally be served. The next morning dawned bright and clear over the Grand Plaza Hotel, but its pristine exterior belied the intense activity within. FBI agents moved purposefully through the building's lower levels. Their focus centered on the ancient bank vault that had sparked so much controversy. In the secure executive wing, Elena watched the sunrise from her temporary suite, her hand absently tracing patterns over her active baby. A soft knock at the door preceded Victoria's entrance. She carried 2 cups of herbal tea, offering one to Elena with a warm smile. "I thought you might be awake. I haven't been sleeping much either." Elena accepted the tea gratefully, noting how naturally Victoria had settled into a caregiving role despite their complicated situation. "How do you do it?" she asked suddenly. "Handle all of this with such grace." Victoria settled into a nearby armchair, adjusting her position to accommodate her own pregnancy. "Grace? I'm terrified half the time, but I've learned that fear doesn't have to paralyze you. Sometimes it can clarify what really matters." Their conversation was interrupted by Alexander's arrival. He looked tired but focused, already impeccably dressed for the day ahead. "The FBI wants to start examining the vault contents this morning," he announced. "They're particularly interested in that letter, Eleanor. Their forensics team thinks there might be more documents hidden in the vault's old safety deposit boxes." "Maxwell's files mentioned something about a hidden compartment," Elena confirmed, setting down her tea. "But he never found it. He was convinced your father modified the vault somehow, Alexander. Added extra security measures." Alexander nodded, thoughtfully. "That sounds like my father. He was always 3 steps ahead, especially when it came to protecting important information." He paused, looking between the 2 women. "The agents want both of you present for the vault opening. They think your combined knowledge might help identify crucial evidence." Victoria straightened in her chair. "Are you sure that's safe? Maxwell might be in custody, but his associates are still out there." "The hotel is crawling with federal agents," Alexander assured her, "and I've doubled our own security. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I've learned not to underestimate either of you." Elena stood up, smoothing her clothes with trembling hands. "When do they want to start?" "In an hour. That gives us time to have breakfast first." Alexander's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "You both need to eat, and we need to discuss what happens after this investigation is over." The 3 made their way to Alexander's private dining room, where a breakfast spread awaited them. As they settled around the table, the morning light streaming through the windows created an almost surreal atmosphere. 3 people whose lives had been thoroughly upended, sharing a meal as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, carefully buttering a piece of toast, "about the future of the hotel, about how to prevent something like this from happening again." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "A foundation," Victoria replied, her eyes lighting up with purpose. "Using part of the hotel's profits to fund investigative journalism and historical research, turn this whole situation into something positive." Elena leaned forward, intrigued. "Like a watchdog organization?" "Exactly. But focused on corporate accountability and historical truth. The kind of organization that might have exposed Maxwell's schemes years ago before he could hurt anyone." Alexander considered this, his expression thoughtful. "It would need careful structuring, the right people in charge. I might know someone who could help with that," Elena said quietly. Both Alexander and Victoria turned to look at her. Before everything with Maxwell, I was working on my master's degree in investigative journalism. I never finished it, but I still have the connections, the knowledge." Victoria's face lit up. "Elena, that's perfect. You could help establish the Foundation's guidelines, maybe even run it eventually." Elena hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the suggestion. "You'd trust me with that?" "Who better?" Alexander asked softly. "You've proven your integrity under the worst circumstances, and you understand firsthand why this work matters." Before Eleanor could respond, Alexander's security chief appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Sir, we've found something in the vault, something that wasn't in any of the records, and there's a message, addressed to you, from your father." The three exchanged glances, their breakfast forgotten. Whatever was waiting in that vault, it was clear that Maxwell's scheme had only scratched the surface of the secrets hidden beneath the Grand Plaza Hotel. As they rose to follow the security chief, Eleanor felt her baby kick again, a reminder that the future they were fighting for wasn't just about exposing past wrongs. It was about creating a world where truth and justice mattered more than power and greed. The elevator ride to the basement levels was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But as they approached the massive vault door, now surrounded by FBI technicians and evidence collection teams, Elena felt Victoria's hand slip into hers, offering silent support. On her other side, Alexander stood tall and steady, his presence a reminder that sometimes the strongest foundations are built on the ashes of what we thought we'd lost. The vault's massive door swung open with a hydraulic hiss, releasing decades of sealed air. The FBI's powerful work lights illuminated the space, revealing rows of safety deposit boxes lining the walls and a central table that must have once served bank officials. But it was what sat on that table now that drew everyone's attention. A simple leather briefcase, weathered but well-preserved, with the Montenegro family crest embossed on its surface. Alexander approached it slowly, recognition flickering across his face. "This was my father's. I remember it from my childhood. He carried it everywhere, but I never knew what was inside." The FBI's lead investigator, Agent Diana Chen, no relation to Sarah, stepped forward. "We found it in a concealed compartment, behind one of the safety deposit boxes. According to the vault's original blueprints, that space shouldn't exist." With gloved hands, Agent Chen carefully opened the briefcase. Inside was a thick envelope addressed simply, "To my son, when the time comes." Alexander accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Elena and Victoria moved closer, providing silent support as he broke the seal and began to read aloud. "My dear Alexander, if you're reading this, then someone has finally discovered what I worked so hard to protect. The truth about the crash of 29 isn't just history. It's a warning about what happens when power goes unchecked, when greed overshadows humanity. I bought this building not just for its potential as a hotel, but because I discovered what the original owners had hidden here. Evidence that could have changed history, could have brought justice to thousands who suffered. But the timing wasn't right. The same families still held too much power, and exposing the truth then would have put our family at risk. So I waited. I protected the evidence, added my own findings over the years, and prepared for the day when someone would be strong enough to use it wisely. Looking at the empire you're building, son, I believe that time has come. But remember, true strength isn't in what you can take, but in what you can protect. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stand up for those who have lost everything." In the vault's southeast corner, behind box 1929, you'll find a complete record of everything I discovered. Use it well, use it wisely, and remember that a Montenegro's word is his bond. We protect what matters, no matter the cost. With love and faith in you, your father. Alexander lowered the letter, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The FBI agents had already moved to the southeast corner, and within minutes they had exposed another hidden compartment. This one contained dozens of documents, photographs, and ledgers, a comprehensive record of one of the greatest financial conspiracies in history. Victoria, her legal mind already working, examined some of the documents. "This is incredible. With this evidence, we could help families recover assets that were stolen generations ago. We could expose corporate structures that were built on fraud, and help prevent it from happening again," Elena added, thinking of the foundation they had discussed over breakfast. "Your father wasn't just protecting history, Alexander. He was protecting the future." Agent Chen cleared her throat. "Mr. Montenegro, this evidence will need to be properly documented and secured. It could take weeks to process everything properly." "Of course," Alexander nodded. Whatever you need, but first... He reached into the briefcase where another, smaller envelope lay hidden in a side pocket. This one was addressed differently. For the ones who choose truth over power. Inside was a single key and a note with an address, a safety deposit box at a modern bank across town. Alexander showed it to Agent Chen, who immediately dispatched agents to secure the location. "Your father thought of everything, Victoria," said softly, squeezing Alexander's hand. "He did," Alexander agreed. "And now it's our turn." He looked at Elena, his expression serious. "The foundation idea. It's not just a good suggestion, it's essential. We need to create something lasting from all of this, something that honors not just my father's legacy, but the courage it takes to stand up for what's right." Elena placed a protective hand over her baby bump, thinking of the future her child would inherit. "I want to help, not just with the foundation, but with making sure this story is told properly. The world needs to understand that it's never too late for justice." Victoria smiled, her own hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Our children will grow up knowing that their parents fought for something bigger than themselves. That's a legacy worth building." The vault's lights caught the Montenegro family crest on the briefcase, making the motto beneath it clearly visible. For the first time, "Veritas numquam perit." Truth never dies. "Maxwell never understood," Alexander said, looking around the vault with new appreciation. "He thought this place held leverage, a way to gain more power. But my father knew the real value of what was hidden here, the power of truth to change the world." As FBI agents continued their careful documentation of the vault's contents, the three stood together, united by something stronger than their past complications. They had chosen truth over power, courage over comfort, and in doing so, had begun writing a new chapter in a story that was bigger than any of them. Outside the vault, the Grand Plaza Hotel continued its daily operations, its guests unaware of the history being unveiled beneath their feet. But soon, very soon, the world would know the truth that had been waiting patiently in the darkness, and when it did, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The days following the vault's opening transformed the Grand Plaza Hotel into a hub of careful, coordinated activity. While the hotel's upper floors maintained their usual atmosphere of luxury and calm, the secure basement levels hummed with the methodical work of FBI analysts and historical experts. Each document revealed from the vault added another piece to a puzzle that had remained unsolved for nearly a century. Alexander sat in his office, reviewing the preliminary reports with Victoria and Elena. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room as they worked through the implications of what they'd discovered. "The safety deposit box at the modern bank," Victoria said, scanning through her notes, "contained detailed instructions for accessing offshore accounts. Your father had been quietly tracking the stolen wealth for decades." Eleanor leaned forward, her journalistic instincts engaged. "Not just tracking, documenting. Every transaction, every shell company, every transfer of wealth. He created a complete paper trail. And now we have to decide how to use it," Alexander added, his voice heavy with responsibility. "These records don't just implicate long-dead bankers. They expose current corporate structures, philanthropic foundations built on stolen money, entire family legacies." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Sarah Chen entered, carrying a thick folder. "The initial legal framework for the foundation is ready for review," she announced, placing the documents on Alexander's desk. "I've included provisions for whistleblower protection and investigative funding." Victoria picked up the folder, her eyes scanning the contents professionally. "This is excellent work, Sarah. The structure protects both the foundation and its beneficiaries." "There's something else," Sarah added, her expression serious. "We've received inquiries from several journalists. Word about the vault is starting to spread." Elena straightened in her chair. "We knew we couldn't keep this quiet forever. The question is, how do we control the narrative?" Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city his father had helped shape. "We don't control it," he said finally. "We guide it. Tell the truth, but tell it responsibly." Starting with Maxwell's trial, Victoria added. His connections to the old banking families aren't coincidental. He was trying to use their secrets to build his own empire. Elena's hand moved to her belly, a gesture that had become automatic when she was deep in thought. We need to tell the human story too, not just the financial crimes, but the impact on real people, the families who lost everything, the lives that were destroyed. And the courage it takes to stand up to power, Victoria added softly, reaching out to squeeze Elena's hand. Your story matters too. Alexander turned back from the window. The Foundation can't just expose past wrongs, it needs to prevent future ones. Education, research, support for investigative journalism, and protection for those who speak out, Elena finished, so no one else has to face what I did alone. Sarah nodded approvingly. I've included provisions for all of that in the Foundation's charter, plus something else, a scholarship program for students studying investigative journalism and financial crime. The Elena Harrison Scholarship? Victoria suggested with a smile. Elena blushed. I don't need my name on anything. The work itself is what matters. Speaking of work, Alexander interjected, the FBI found something else in the vault this morning, personal letters from some of the families who lost everything in the crash. They'd been trying to warn people, trying to expose the truth. He pulled out a stack of yellowed envelopes, each one containing a piece of the story they were now tasked with telling. As they began reading through the letters, the human cost of the financial conspiracy became heartbreakingly clear. Listen. To this, Elena said softly, reading from one letter, my children ask why we had to leave our home. How do I explain that the money their grandfather worked so hard to save simply vanished? How do I tell them that some men's greed is more powerful than other men's honesty? Victoria wiped away a tear. We have to make this right, not just by exposing the truth, but by using it to create real change. We will, Alexander promised, looking at the women who had helped him understand what his father had known all along, that true power lies not in what you can take, but in what you can protect. The afternoon sun continued its slow descent, casting the office in warm golden light. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that within the walls of the Grand Plaza Hotel, a small group of people was preparing to reshape its understanding of history and justice. Sarah gathered her papers, preparing to leave. I'll have the final Foundation documents ready tomorrow. Once they're signed, we can begin the real work. The real work has already begun, Elena said quietly, looking at the letters spread across the desk. It began the moment we chose truth over fear. As if in agreement, both babies chose that moment to kick, making Eleanor and Victoria laugh. Even in the midst of uncovering decades-old secrets and confronting powerful enemies, life continued its persistent march forward, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and the hope of a more just future. 1 month after the opening of the vault, the Grand Plaza Hotel's Grand Ballroom hosted an event unlike any in its history. The room was filled not with the usual society elite, but with journalists, academics, legal experts, and representatives from families affected by the banking crash of 1929. Above the podium, a banner announced the launch of the Montenegro Foundation for Truth and Justice. Elena stood at the entrance, greeting arrivals and directing them to their seats. Her pregnancy was more visible now, but so was her confidence. Gone was the frightened woman who had scrubbed floors to hide from her past. In her place stood a future Foundation director, already commanding respect from some of the country's top investigative journalists. Victoria worked the room with practiced ease, her legal background proving invaluable as she explained the Foundation's structure to potential partners and supporters. Her own pregnancy had become a symbol of the future they were all working to protect, a world where truth and justice weren't just ideals, but actionable principles. Alexander watched them both with pride as he prepared to take the stage. His father's letter sat in his pocket, a tangible reminder of the legacy he was now tasked with carrying forward. The weight of responsibility felt different now, not a burden, but a privilege. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed ballroom. We're here today not just to launch a foundation, but to acknowledge a debt to history, to truth, and to those who had the courage to stand up for what's right. As he spoke, Screens around the room displayed carefully selected documents from the vault, each one telling part of the story that had brought them to this moment. My father protected these records for decades, waiting for the right time to bring them to light. But he did more than preserve history. He showed us that it's never too late for justice, that the truth, no matter how long buried, has power. Eleanor stepped onto the stage next, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. The Foundation's first initiative will be the creation of a secure platform for whistleblowers, providing legal protection and support for those who choose to expose corporate wrongdoing. No one should have to face that journey alone. Victoria joined them, outlining the legal framework that would protect both the Foundation and those it sought to help. "We're not just looking backward," she explained. "We're creating tools to prevent future abuses of power, to ensure that financial crimes can't stay hidden for generations." The audience listened intently as the three of them laid out their vision for the future. Among them sat families whose ancestors had lost everything in the crash, their faces showing a mix of grief and hope as they finally saw the possibility of justice. Sarah Chen, now the Foundation's lead counsel, presented the first round of grant recipients, investigative journalists and researchers who would help piece together the full story of what had happened and its modern implications. As the each formal presentations concluded, Alexander made one final announcement. "In honor of those who risked everything to protect the truth, we're establishing the Harrison Montenegro Fellowship for Investigative Journalism. This annual grant will support journalists working to expose corporate corruption and financial crimes." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. This hadn't been part of the planned announcements. But as she looked at Alexander and Victoria, she saw only sincere appreciation and respect in their faces. The crowd rose in applause, but the real work was just beginning. In a secure room adjacent to the ballroom, FBI agents continued their analysis of the vault's contents. Each day brought new revelations, new connections to be investigated, new wrongs to be righted. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Eleanor found herself back in Alexander's office with him and Victoria. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, a reminder of all the lives they hoped to impact. "My father would be proud," Alexander said quietly, looking at the Foundation's charter framed on his wall. "Not just of what we're doing, but of how we're doing it." Victoria smiled, her hand finding Elena's. "We're building something bigger than ourselves, something that will outlast all of us. Something our children can be proud of," Elena added, thinking of the future they were helping to shape. The office door opened, and Sarah entered with an urgent expression. "You all need to see this," she said, placing a newly discovered document on the desk. "We found it in one of the last safety deposit boxes. It's not just about the crash, it's about what some of these families are doing right now." As they gathered around the desk, their momentary celebration gave way to renewed purpose. The Foundation's launch wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward justice. But now they had the tools, the support, and most importantly, the unwavering commitment to see it through. The newly discovered document lay spread across Alexander's desk like a detonator waiting to explode. Sarah had been right. This wasn't just historical evidence. The paperwork revealed an ongoing scheme that connected several of the country's most prominent families to a series of recent market manipulations. "Look at these signatures," Victoria said, pointing to a series of names at the bottom of one page. "Harrison Blackwood III, Elizabeth Rothridge, James Pendleton. These are current board members of some of the largest banks in the country." Elena leaned closer, her journalist's eye catching crucial details. The dates on these transactions, they align perfectly with the market crashes of the last decade. They're using the same playbook their grandfathers used in 1929. Alexander paced the office, his mind racing. This isn't just about exposing past wrongs anymore. We're dealing with active financial manipulation. "Which makes this infinitely more dangerous," Sarah added, her expression grave. "These people have real power right now, and they won't hesitate to use it." As if to emphasize her point, Alexander's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his board chairman. The stock price of Grand Plaza Hotels had suddenly started dropping with no apparent cause. "It's already beginning," Victoria said, quickly pulling up financial news on her tablet. "Look, anonymous sources are spreading rumors about the hotel's financial stability." Elena's hand instinctively moved to protect her belly. "They're trying to silence us before we can expose them." "No," Alexander said firmly, stopping his pacing. "They're trying to scare us, but they don't understand what they're dealing with." He turned to Sarah. "Get me everything you can on Harrison Blackwood III. Family history, business connections, everything." Victoria was already on her phone, activating her network of legal contacts. "We need to move the Foundation's announcement up. Get ahead of their narrative." "Wait," Elena said suddenly, her eyes fixed on a detail in the documents. "Look at this notation, Project Legacy. It appears in both the historical records and these new documents. What if it's not just a code? No, what if it's an actual project?" Alexander leaned over her shoulder, examining the reference. "There's something familiar about this. My father. He used to mention a Project Legacy when I was young. I always thought he was talking about the hotel." Sarah quickly searched through her files. "Here, in the original Vault documents. Project Legacy isn't just a name, it's a location. There's an old research facility outside the city, owned by a holding company that connects back to all these families." "A facility that's still active," Elena added, quickly cross-referencing with recent satellite images on her laptop. "Look, regular vehicle movement, updated security systems, modern surveillance." Victoria's legal mind was already working. If they're still using the same facility after all these years, then they're probably keeping their current records there too, Alexander finished, just like their grandfathers did. The implications hung heavy in the air. They had stumbled onto something much bigger than historical justice. They had found evidence of ongoing financial crimes that could shake the foundations of the country's banking system. A sharp knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Marcus, the head of security, entered with an urgent expression. "Sir, we've got a situation. Someone just tried to hack our security system. They were specifically targeting the Vault cameras." "They're getting nervous," Elena observed. "They know we have something." Alexander straightened his tie, a gesture that everyone had come to recognize as his preparation for battle. "Then we need to move fast. Sarah, start the legal proceedings. We need court orders to protect this evidence. Victoria, activate your media contacts. We control the narrative this time." "And me?" Eleanor asked, standing despite her exhaustion. "You," Alexander said softly, "need to tell your story, all of it. The public needs to understand that this isn't just about numbers and transactions. It's about real people, real lives affected by corporate greed." Victoria moved to stand beside Elena. "We'll help you. Your story connects the past to the present in a way that people can understand." Outside the office windows, the city skyline glittered with the lights of financial institutions and corporate headquarters. Behind those lights, people in expensive suits were probably already planning their next moves, confident in their power to silence any opposition. But in this office, something different was taking shape. A coalition of people who had chosen truth over power, justice over profit. The document on the desk wasn't just evidence. It was a key to unlocking decades of financial corruption. Sarah gathered the papers carefully. "I'll have the legal team work through the night. We need to be ready for their counterattack." "They'll try to discredit us first," Victoria predicted. "Personal attacks, financial pressure, media manipulation. Let them try," Elena said, her voice stronger than ever. "Some truths can't be buried, some stories need to be told." Alexander looked at the three women who had become his strongest allies. "Then let's tell this story right, starting with Project Legacy." The Project Legacy facility sprawled across 20 acres of carefully maintained grounds, its modern security features at odds with the classical architecture of the main building. From their observation point half a mile away, Alexander and his team watched as expensive cars came and went through the guarded gates. "Facial recognition just confirmed," Marcus reported quietly, checking his tablet. "Harrison Blackwood III arrived 20 minutes ago. Elizabeth Rothridge and James Pendleton are already inside." "They're gathering," Victoria observed. "They must know we're close to exposing everything." Elena sat in the surveillance van, coordinating. with the FBI team that had been quietly investigating since the vault documents came to light. Agent Chen says they're in position. They just need confirmation that the evidence is inside. Alexander adjusted his tie one last time. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance at exposing the truth while protecting everyone involved. Sarah, are we covered legally? The warrants are ready, Sarah confirmed. As soon as we have probable cause, the FBI can move in. Victoria squeezed Alexander's hand. Are you sure about this? Walking in there yourself is dangerous. It's the only way, he replied. They'll be expecting me. After all, I'm exactly the kind of person they're used to dealing with. Wealthy, influential, someone with something to lose. Except you're not playing their game, Elena added softly. No, Alexander smiled. I'm playing my father's game. The long game. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Alexander would approach openly, using his reputation and family name to request a meeting. The banking families would assume he was there to negotiate, to protect his own interests. They wouldn't expect him to be wearing a wire or to have FBI agents positioned around the facility. Remember, Agent Chen's voice crackled through their earpieces. We need them to explicitly discuss the market manipulation. Get them talking about Project Legacy. Alexander straightened his jacket and headed toward his car. But before he could open the door, Elena called out to him. Wait, she said, wadding over with something in her hand. It was the sonogram picture from her latest appointment. For luck. A reminder of what we're fighting for. Victoria joined them, adding her own sonogram to Elena's. For the future, she said firmly. Alexander carefully tucked both images into his breast pocket, right next to his father's letter. For all of us, he agreed. The drive to the facility's gate took less than 5 minutes. The guard recognized him immediately. The Montenegro name still carried weight in certain circles. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you, sir, the guard said, raising the barrier. Main building, second floor conference room. The interior of the building was a study in old money and power. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced patriarchs, plush carpets that muffled all sound. Alexander was escorted to an elevator by a discreet security officer. When the conference room doors opened, he found himself facing the very people whose signatures he'd seen on those damning documents. Harrison Blackwood III, every bit as imposing, as his grandfather, sat at the head of the table. Elizabeth Rothridge, elegant and sharp-eyed, sat to his right. James Pendleton, younger than the others but no less dangerous, stood by the window. Alexander Montenegro, Blackwood said warmly, though his eyes remained cold. We've been expecting you. I assume you're here to discuss recent events at your hotel. Actually, Alexander replied, taking the offered seat, I'm here to discuss Project Legacy. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Rothridge's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on her water glass. Pendleton turned from the window, his casual pose suddenly alert. Project Legacy, Blackwood repeated carefully, is a private matter. Family business, you might say. Yes, Alexander agreed. Family business that started in 1929, continued through generations, and is still operating today. Very much like the market manipulation schemes detailed in these documents. He placed a folder on the table, copies of what they'd found in the vault, along with the newer evidence. Blackwood didn't even glance at them. You're playing a dangerous game, Montenegro, Rothridge said softly. Your father understood the rules. He kept quiet, protected the truth, played his part. No, Alexander corrected her. My father protected the evidence until someone was ready to use it properly. He wasn't playing your game. He was setting up his own. Pendleton laughed, but there was no humor in it. And you think you're ready? You think you can take on families that have controlled the financial world for generations? I think, Alexander said calmly, that it's time for some truth. About the crash, about the families who lost everything, about the ongoing manipulation, of markets, about Project Legacy. Truth, Blackwood scoffed. Truth is whatever we say it is. We built this country's financial system. We control it. One word from us and your hotel empire crumbles. Alexander smiled, reaching up to straighten his tie. Funny you should mention that. Would you like to elaborate on exactly how you control the markets? Before Blackwood could respond, the conference room doors burst open. FBI agents flooded in, led by Agent Chen. "I think we've heard enough," she announced. "Harrison Blackwood III, Elizabeth Rothridge, James Pendleton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud." As the agents read them their rights, Alexander stood calmly. Through his earpiece, he could hear Elena and Victoria cheering. Outside, more FBI teams were entering the building, armed with warrants to search every inch of the facility. Projecty. Legacy was about to become public knowledge, and with it, Hayes' century of financial manipulation would finally be exposed to the light of day. The morning after the arrests at Project Legacy, the Grand Plaza Hotel's executive floor was transformed into a command center. FBI agents worked alongside financial investigators, piecing together the vast network of corruption that had been uncovered. Newspapers across the country blazed with headlines about the scandal, while financial markets reeled from the revelations. Eleanor sat in what had become her unofficial office, sifting through decades of documented evidence. Her journalistic training proved invaluable as she helped construct a timeline of events that connected the past to the present. On her desk, a framed copy of her first major article about the scandal sat beside her laptop. The story had already won consideration for several prestigious awards. "You should be resting," Victoria said, entering with 2 cups of herbal tea. At 8 months pregnant, she still managed to maintain her commanding presence, though she'd traded her usual heels for comfortable flats. "So should you," Eleanor replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "But I don't think any of us can rest just yet. Look at this. I've found connections to at least 30 more prominent families." Victoria settled into a chair, reviewing the documents Elena had flagged. "The legal implications are staggering. We're not just talking about criminal charges. These families could face civil suits from thousands of descendants of their original victims." A knock at the door preceded Sarah Chen's entrance. She carried a thick stack of papers and wore an expression of barely contained excitement. "You're both going to want to see this. We found something in Blackwood's private office at the Legacy facility." She spread the papers across Elena's desk, detailed records of recent market manipulations, complete with dates, amounts, and the names of all involved parties. But it was what lay beneath those papers that made Elena gasp. "Are those adoption records?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Dozens of them, dating back to the 1930s. It seems the families didn't just steal money. They sometimes took children from the people they ruined, raised them as their own, ensuring their empire would continue through the generations." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. "My God, the implication—" "It gets worse," Sarah continued. "Some of these adoptions were forced. Parents were given a choice: give up their children or face complete financial ruin. The families called it protecting their investment in the future." Elena's hands shook as she examined the records. "We need to find these people. Their descendants deserve to know the truth about their heritage." "Alexander's already on it," Victoria said. "He's established a task force specifically for tracking down the affected families. The Foundation will provide whatever support they need, legal, financial, emotional." The door opened again, and Alexander entered, looking exhausted but determined. His tie was slightly loosened, a sure sign of the pressure he was under. "Maxwell's talking," he announced without preamble. "In exchange for a reduced sentence, he's providing details about current market manipulation schemes. It seems his attempt to take over the hotel was part of a larger plan orchestrated by the Legacy families." "To silence us?" Elena asked. Alexander shook his head. "To use us. They wanted to add the hotel to their network of legitimate businesses that could be used for money laundering. Maxwell was just their latest puppet." Victoria stood, moving to stand beside her husband. "But they didn't count on one thing." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "The truth," Elena answered softly. "They didn't count on the truth having its own power." Alexander nodded, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a new letter, this one from the FBI's director. "They want us to establish a permanent task force. The Foundation's work exposed something bigger than just financial crimes. We're looking at a century of systematic corruption that affected every level of society. And they want us to help fix it, Victoria added, her legal mind already working on the implications. Elena looked around the room at these people who had become more than allies. They had become family. Each of them carried part of the solution. Alexander's resources and determination, Victoria's legal expertise, Sarah's strategic mind, and her own commitment to exposing the truth. "We're going to need help," she said thoughtfully. "More investigators. More researchers." "Already in progress," Alexander replied. "The Foundation's receiving applications from some of the best investigative journalists and financial experts in the country. People want to be part of this." Sarah gathered her papers, a small smile playing at her lips. "I heard from Agent Chen. Blackwood and the others are already turning on each other, trying to cut deals. The whole house of cards is falling." "Good," Victoria said firmly. "Let it fall. We'll build something better in its place." As if in agreement, both babies chose that moment to kick, making Elena and Victoria laugh despite the seriousness of the situation. Life had a way of reminding them what really mattered, not just exposing past wrongs, but creating a better future for the next generation. Alexander moved to the window, looking out over the city he'd helped change. "My father once told me, that true power isn't in what you can take, but in what you can protect." I never fully understood what he meant until now. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Below, reporters still crowded the hotel's entrance, hungry for more details about the scandal that was reshaping the nation's understanding of its own financial history. But up here in this room, 4 people who had chosen truth over power were already planning their next moves. The legacy families had spent generations building their empire of secrets and lies. It would take time to dismantle it all, to find every victim, to right every wrong. They were ready for the challenge. The Grand Plaza Hotel's presidential suite had been converted into a temporary nursery. 2 cribs stood side by side near the panoramic windows, while comfortable rocking chairs awaited the mothers-to-be. It wasn't a conventional arrangement, but then nothing about their situation had been conventional. Eleanor stood by the window, one hand resting on her enormous belly, watching the sunrise over the city. Victoria sat nearby, reviewing Foundation documents despite her doctor's orders to rest. Both women were due within weeks of each other, and neither was willing to step back from the important work they'd begun. "Another family came forward last night," Victoria said, setting aside her tablet. "They had papers hidden in their grandmother's attic, proof that their property was stolen during the crash. The legacy families forced them to sign over their deed at a fraction of its value." Eleanor turned from the window. "Let me guess, that property is now worth millions?" "Try billions. It's the site of one of the country's largest shopping centers." The door opened, and Alexander entered carrying breakfast trays. Despite the early hour, he was impeccably dressed, though his eyes showed the strain of recent weeks. "The FBI just called," he announced, setting down the trays. "They've found another facility similar to Project Legacy, this one in Chicago. Same setup, same families involved." "How many more are out there?" Elena wondered, accepting a cup of decaf coffee. "As many as they needed to maintain control," Victoria answered, "but they're not invincible anymore. Each discovery brings more people forward, more evidence to light." Alexander sat beside his wife, his hand automatically moving to her belly. The Foundation's already helped 20 families reclaim stolen assets, and that's just the beginning. "Speaking of beginnings," Elena said softly, "I've been thinking about names." Both Alexander and Victoria looked at her with interest. They had all grown surprisingly comfortable with their unconventional family arrangement, supporting each other through the pregnancies while working to expose generations of financial corruption. "I want to name him Thomas," Elena continued. "After your father, Alexander. He protected the truth for so long, waited for the right time. He deserves to be remembered." Alexander's eyes grew misty. "Eleanor, you don't have to." "I want to," she insisted. Your father's legacy isn't just in those vault documents. It's in the choice he made to protect the truth, to believe that someday someone would be strong enough to use it wisely. Victoria smiled, reaching for Elena's hand. It's perfect. And we've decided on a name too, Hope, because that's what all of this is really about, isn't it? Hope for a better future, hope for justice, hope for change. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Sarah entered, looking both excited and apprehensive. The first interviews are ready. Families who lost everything in the crash, their descendants, they want to tell their stories. Elena straightened, journalist mode engaging despite her exhaustion. How many? Hundreds, Sarah replied, and more coming forward every day. The Foundation's website crashed from all the submissions. Alexander stood, straightening his tie. Then we'd better get to work. The truth won't tell itself. But Victoria caught his arm. First, we celebrate. These babies are coming any day now, and I want us to take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. She was right, of course. In the month since they discovered the vault's secrets, their lives had transformed completely. Eleanor had gone, from hiding as a housekeeper to becoming one of the country's most respected investigative journalists. Victoria had expanded her legal expertise to help hundreds of families seek justice, and Alexander had discovered that his father's legacy was far greater than just a successful hotel chain. They gathered near the window, watching the city come alive below them. Somewhere out there, more legacy facilities waited to be discovered. More families needed to hear the truth about their past. More wrongs needed to be righted. But for now, in this moment, they were just three people brought together by fate and choice, standing on the brink of new beginnings. Their babies would be born into a world where the truth was finally coming to light, where long-buried secrets were being exposed, where justice was possible even after generations of waiting. Elena felt her baby kick and smiled. Thomas, she whispered. Victoria echoed her smile, her hand on her own belly. Hope. Alexander looked at both women, marveling at how life could change so completely, so wonderfully. To new beginnings, he said softly. To the truth, Elena added. To family, Victoria finished. Outside, the sun continued its rise, painting the sky in colors of promise and possibility. The day was just beginning, and with it, a new chapter, in their ongoing story of truth, justice, and the power of choosing what's right over what's easy.